Hey everybody, Craig from the University of Applied Research and Development, and it is our privilege to have with us Guy Zymann, who is a specialist in blast protection and leads for Temet. Guy, good morning. Good to have you with us.
Good morning and good afternoon, and it's a pleasure to be there.
Now, we're co-members of the Disaster Researchers and Disaster Management Professionals group, and it was great to see the different posts that you put into the group there. And for me, I have no experience in blast protection and what you do, so why don't you just tell us and share with us some of your experiences and how you came to be with Temet?
Well, once again, thank you for having me here, and I'm with Temet. Temet is a group of companies specialized in sheltering equipment, and mostly in the field of the blast and CBRN protection, collective protection only. And we don't do only blast protection. We take the whole of a shelter as a holistic solution to offer to our customers. To relate it to the emergency preparedness, we believe that you can be as prepared as you want, but if somebody bomb your headquarters, you're going to run like a chicken without a head, and that's something that we cannot afford. And so, first of all, there are a few critical infrastructure that must be protected, and they must function fully, actually, over their 100% in emergencies. You were asking about how did I get to this position and this company, or should I talk more about Temet?
Yeah, that'd be great. Tell us how you came to be interested in your role and joined the company.
Well, I've been doing quite a lot of different fields of business in my history, and I came to a company in Israel called Bethel Industries, who is one of the leading company in blast protection and CBRN protection for mobile application mainly. Also stationary, but mostly armored vehicles and so on, or containers and etc. And I was working there for about 9 years, and I did a lot of interesting projects and a lot of development. And then I got an offer from Temet in Finland, who was the leader and is the leader worldwide in shelter protection and stationary applications. And I joined the company as a VP of sales, of international sales, and I realized that one of the missing things in Temet is the business development and the understanding that you must educate the people, the client. We don't have a direct client. This is very interesting for this kind of business. We basically it's like marketing 101 in the university, that you have the purchaser, but you have the buyer that pay for it. You have the influencer that will influence the decision, and all those roles are easily identified in a project of a shelter. For example, if you take the end user, which is many talking about military shelters, it's the military. But they normally, within the military, they are not the one who is paying, it's the Ministry of Defense. And there is another segment, another organization that define the needs, the threat analysis, what should be there, what kind of protection is required, and what kind of tools are required for that specific project. And then you have a design company that's going to design the project. They're going to design it until 30 or 60, depends on the project percent of the design. And then they're going to transfer it to a construction company, who's going to be the prime, they're going to lead the project. And another company, sometimes it's a different company, will complete the design to 100%. And the construction company based normally is working with us. So there are so many steps before they even can approach it, before it even goes on to a tender, if it goes out to a tender. So there is a lot of education that need to be done. And I think that in general, you will agree, and I think everybody in our business will agree, that the public is not well educated in emergency preparedness.
Yes, it's a good reminder for emergency professionals about all the different pieces of the puzzle and the different people who make decisions along the way. I think to anchor it into people's understanding, why don't you tell us about Fukushima and your experience there?
Yeah. Well, Fukushima, when I started working with Battelle Industries, one of my target market was Japan. And Japan, as you all know, is a very tough market to penetrate. They have very strict requirement and quality assurance, and also they are not open to discover everything their state secret, and to talk about different events and different needs and product and facilities. It's very rare in Japan. And a year after I joined Battelle, Fukushima disaster happened, which was horrible. If anyone knows Japan and been there, I lived in Japan for a couple of years, and coming back to Japan after Fukushima when everything was dark, many of the street lights were dark. It was really horrible. And the whole Fukushima event, in my own perspective, was a matter of emergency preparedness. First of all, there was a report that was issued before the disaster saying that there will be an earthquake, there will be a high tsunami wave of estimated, I think it was estimated in the report, about 12 to 15 meters high. And that was a couple of years before that. The Fukushima Daiichi power plant decided to take it not that serious and made a lower seawall to protect from the tsunami. There is another power plant about 20, 30 kilometers north of that, also on the coastline, who took the report very seriously, had a very high seawall, and was actually was a shelter, safe haven during the disaster to other people that had to escape from their home, and was not damaged at all. Then, secondly, the command center in the Fukushima power plant was destroyed because of the rolling event, and they could not control it. Then, the secondary offsite command center was also contaminated with the pollution, so they could not manage the event from there. The third offsite command center, which is about 20 kilometers away, was already occupied with evacuated people that were evacuated to that center. So there was also, they were not in their natural environment to control and manage the situation well. And I think it caused, I don't know if that's the reason that it caused, but I think radiological in event in general caused a lot of radiophobia. People are afraid. They don't know what it means, because on one hand, the radiological therapy cures us. And on the other hand, too much radiological exposure will kill us. Where does the line goes? So a lot of people were evacuated. You should see images of hospitals there with wheelchairs are thrown on the side because people were rushed into helicopters, elderly people, and evacuated by choppers. There was one hospital that had, I think, if I remember correctly, 300, that was still a decade ago, 341 patients in that hospital, and 50 patients died within the next few days after that, after the event, because of the evacuation, because of the rush and the emergency and the panic that was there. I'm not blaming or criticizing the Japanese. Nobody was really well prepared for such a scenario. But we do need to study and to learn from that, and to think for the future, what should we do? And because of that event, I went to the government, the Japanese government, together with our agent in Japan, and start talking about preparedness. What should you do? Why should you evacuate those people? Because 99 or 98% of the people can evacuate by themselves. There is only a limited number of people that you need to protect. You need to provide them time to have an orderly evacuation. And then they initiated the project of protecting the facilities, the civilian facilities around the power plants throughout Japan. This was a huge project, a lot of money invested in that. And the idea was to create in those places where you need to evacuate people, you need time to prepare the buses, to prepare the choppers, however you're going to actually to evaluate the scenario. Do you really need to evacuate them? And so we created a shelter, like not to protect from blast actually, but to protect from the contaminants in the air. Same concept of a shelter, over pressurizing the shelter in order to protect it from elsewhere. And maybe this is a good chance to give a shelter 101 quick brief to our
Please
audience.
do.
A shelter, as far as a airborne threat protection, is kind of like a balloon. You inflate, only clean air goes through the filters into the shelter, and you regulate the outlet of the air. That will create a balloon scenario, that it's like the shelter is like pushing outward, and the air, if there is any crack in the wall or in the anywhere, the air will only go outwards and cannot come in. So any wind gust or explosion outside cannot push the contaminant inside the shelter,
Mm.
and the fresh air goes only through the filters. And there were quite a few projects that are very successful and very, very nice, and in a very Japanese way, done very clean and neat.
So I just want to pick up on some things that you said there. So in Japan, there was a report that warned about the earthquake or an earthquake and warned about the scale or the size of the wave that needed to be prepared for.
Yeah.
And one of the nuclear plants further down actually did respond to that and prepared
Right.
for that scenario, even though it wasn't guaranteed to happen. They did actually prepare for it. And one of the bigger failings in the response was that one command center was destroyed, and the pollution was a problem, so they couldn't use it. And then the
The
other
one
one
on
was
site was
full.
destroyed of the explosion and the
Yes.
flood and everything. Yes.
So there were not the redundancies that need to be built into this system of responding to an emergency. In case one is destroyed or there is pollution, there needed to be redundancies built into the system. Does that capture that?
Let me refine it a little bit. They had redundancy. They actually had triple redundancy, because they had the on-site control center, the off-site, which is about a few kilometers away from the power plant, and the secondary off-site, which is about 20 to 30 kilometers away from the power plant. So they had the redundancy. They were prepared, but they did not protect their asset. This is the most critical asset that
Right.
must be protected. Without it, nobody can function well. If you want, I had when I needed to break down into very simple words of what are we protecting and so on, and what you need to protect in emergency preparedness. And I said, okay, there is, first of all, there is the head. Our body cannot function without our mind, and we need to protect it. So all the command centers, all the headquarters, all the critical infrastructure, that without it, people don't think of that. The power plant in any country, not necessarily a nuclear in Japan, it's just a power plant. If there is an emergency, somebody should be there in the emergency to switch on the light if there is a problem, or to tell the forces where is the problem and fix it. Otherwise, we won't have electricity. If he's running to his shelter and nobody is there, we're not going to have electricity. So all those basic function, and I call them the mind, the head, that allow us to control the situation. The second function that we must have is the hands. People the forces that going, the first responders, they need to be protected. This is a different kind of protection. They need to have a personal protection equipment, and they need to go into the scene to protect. And all of those, the mind and the hands, are working to protect the heart. And the heart is the civilians and the human lives, and every citizen and every human that we need to protect. And those two have to function at 100% during emergency in order to protect humans.
The shelter that you were just talking about, it was like a balloon. It was pressurized, so it made sure that the air was going outwards, not coming in. Can you tell us some more of the features of of different shelters, some of the innovations?
Sure. Okay. I'll go general, and if you want me to go in, basically I'm a salesperson, so I can talk for 4 minutes or 4 hours. Just give me a subject, I have no problem. But a shelter has basically two parameters: the blast parameters and the gas tight parameters, because it protects from two main threats, that's explosion and non-conventional weapons or contaminants, whether it's TIC, toxic industrial chemicals, or chemical warfare. So the outer parameter is the blast parameter that should protect the envelope of the facility against any blast. It can be an underground shelter, it can be above ground shelter, it can be a bedrock shelter. It doesn't matter. And according to the threat analysis, you have to define what kind of blast protection this parameter must have. There are shelters with 30 centimeters, 300 millimeters of wall thickness, and there are shelters of 3 meters wall thickness. Depends
Wow.
of what are you protecting and how important is your asset, okay, and how critical is the function, and also what is the threat analysis. And then you have and everything have to be holistic: the blast doors, the blast windows, blast valves to protect the air opening, escape hatch, etc. So there are many different factors that need to be taken into consideration of the design team. And then you have the gas tight parameter, which basically that's the balloon that we're talking about, and that is protecting the TFA, the toxic free area that inside the shelter, from any contaminants. And again, contaminants can be, I think the modern term is CBRN: chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear. Chemical will be chemical warfare, which is gases, and can be also toxic industrial chemicals, which are, if you think about it, most terrorist groups or any other than big nations cannot get their hand on chemical warfare, but they can do a conventional explosion on non-conventional contaminants and create an unconventional event, and
Right.
people will be just as scared as it was the big country that made the big explosion. If you have now a chlorine tanker explode in some city, that will create panic, and people will think that there is a CBRN attack, an unconventional attack. So back to the chemical. That's the chemical. The biological is all the virus, bacteria, biological weapons, etc. Radiological, it's the the fallout of the any
Right.
kind of nuclear event, and the nuclear is mostly considered to be the gases that can be the iodine or the cesium or different radioactive gases that go dispersed to the air when there is any kind of fusion. Um, all those, and it sounds just simple four pillars, but inside them there is subgroup and subcategories. And just to give a brief idea, the EU has a list of over 100,000 different TIC, toxic industrial chemicals, that hazardous materials. That's a huge number, and
Mm.
we need to make some kind of compromise in the protection.
So I'm just imagining in my mind these shelters can either be temporary or really set up really quickly because there's been a disaster and there needs to be a shelter established for the command center or for other reasons. And then these could be permanent as well. So, can you give us an idea of some other disaster response situations that you've been involved in or Temet has been involved in?
First of all, that's a great point that you just made. Our belief, and many countries do that, is that shelters must be dual use. And the reason is that we build a
Uh-huh.
shelter and we put it aside for the next 2 or 3 or 4 or forever, 2 or 3 decades or forever. Normally, a shelter is designed for about 30 years standby. And we wish we never use it. If it's
Right.
used as a dual use, meaning that during normal time it operates in different function, I will explain about it in a second, then the maintenance of the structure is ongoing. And
Mhm.
the whole shelter is kept at a very good condition and ready for the order to transfer into shelter. And I give you an interesting example from Finland, for example. In Finland, there is a swimming pool. In my old neighborhood, there was a swimming pool there that was actually a shelter. It's an underground swimming pool. There is all the sports facilities underground. There are shelters, subway stations. Obviously, that's a easy example. Parking lots, storage facilities, everything that can use the space easily and doesn't need some sunlight. And that's making sure that the shelter is at a good condition when we need it.
Hmm.
That answered your question.
Yeah, that's really good. So these shelters that you're talking about, a swimming pool that's underground, you mean the facilities is
Mhm.
dual use. So it can be a shelter in a times of crisis, but on an ongoing day-to-day basis, people are using it for recreation. Is that what you're
Yes.
saying?
Yes. I'll give you another interesting example in Israel. In the north of Israel, there is a hospital called the Rambam Hospital in the city of Haifa. And that hospital have several shelters. Some critical function cannot go underground, so they have to be protected above ground, like the surgery room, the blood bank
Mhm.
is actually above ground, the ICU, and so on. And all the parking lot, the 3 floors of the parking garage, are actually an emergency hospital for 2,000 beds in case of emergency, fully CBRN protected and can function for a very long time under that threat. And these are the people that have the time and can be brought down to the shelter because they are not in surgery and not in critical situation. And in the parking lot, there is already assembled in the wall plugs for the oxygen, electricity,
Wow.
location for the beds, everything is ready. And that's easy to maintain because it's everyday use and cleaned.
It's fascinating. Guy, just before we wrap up, could you share with us for some people that are really interested in this, aspiring professionals who would like to work in this area, what sort of advice would you give them if they wanted to enter this industry or do something like you do?
Well, two things. First of all, about the industry, I think that as I was involved in changing the mission of Temet and making it very brief and very short, saving life, period. This is our mission now. We all, from the production guy, everybody is in saving lives. And when you have that mission, I think it gives you much more energy to do and motivation to do much more things and do it better because everything is important. You cannot make a mistake because that will cause human life.
Hmm.
That's one thing. Second, about being a manager, being an executive, and going into the either the governmental or the private sector. Believe in yourself. You have more to share and more to contribute than you think of. Um, when I was a young salesperson, I wrote in the beginning of the millennium, around the year 2000, I wrote a newsletter, and I had 1,000 followers, and now 1,000 followers it's nothing because we are in the internet age. But back then there was not too many people that had that reading the newsletter, and I was surprised how many people are reading the my modest newsletter. They want to know. To knowledge is power. You provide them knowledge, you provide them information. That's a lot of power, and they will look at you at somebody that can help them. It doesn't matter if they are very very senior, president of the association, president of the university, or government official or minister. They are human beings, and they need to have some support. They cannot do everything by themselves, and you can provide that. Believe in yourself, and they believe it too.
That's really great, Guy. One of the things that we encourage our bachelor and master's students particularly to do is to consider themselves as thought leaders. So when they're doing their research, doing their dissertation, we want them to publish it online so that then they can start having conversations with people in the industry at different levels, so that they can make a contribution, share that knowledge, get feedback, and really lead the conversation. I love that you said that. So have a mission, believe in yourself, and engage in those conversations.
Yes.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Guy Zymann, I really want to thank you for giving us your time. I know that you're very busy. It's great that you've shared your experiences, particularly with Fukushima. I've learned a lot more about the shelters, the different types of shelters, and I have to say it was a light bulb moment for me to think about the dual use and the standby or actually being used for day-to-day purposes. But that means that the maintenance is ongoing for these
Yes.
shelters rather than something waiting to be used. If
Also,
it's always
the
used, that's really
initial
good.
cost. Also,
Sorry?
the initial cost is also shared.
Right. And having that parking lot that actually has in the wall the different plugs ready for it to be used for that emergency response, the thinking ahead, obviously that takes time, it takes money, it takes thought, but the saving the lives is what it's all about, just like your mission with Temet.
Yes, I think that making the difference between a parking lot and a shelter parking lot, the difference is not that big. Creating a shelter just to be a shelter, that's a big investment. That's a big difference. It was my pleasure to be here, and you're welcome to call me back again anytime. And I think, as I said, educating everybody is a mission that we need to do. Everybody in emergency preparedness, spread the word as much as possible. And if you or anyone has a question, you're welcome to contact me during my
Thank you.
LinkedIn or email.
That's great. So I just, for everyone who's watching this, particularly in the recording and for our students and people in our disaster preparedness groups, in our description underneath the video in Facebook and LinkedIn and on YouTube, I've got Guy's LinkedIn address there as well, so you can reach out to Guy there. And for everybody else who's watching this, if you wish to pursue a bachelor degree or a master's degree in emergency response and risk management, please do reach out to us. We've got the links underneath the video. We have a new way of delivering our program as well, so that you can be anywhere, anytime learning. And also, if you are an experienced emergency manager and you have training and certificates, and every emergency manager I know and Guy knows would have a big folder full of certificates, because emergency managers are always training, we will recognize and give credit and recognition for all of your training and your experience as well, so you can finish your degrees faster, recognizing the contribution that you've made. Guy, please don't go after we end the video. Love to have some more chat with you. Thanks everybody for being with us.